My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Technology and advances in the way we connect with one another, originally thought of as exciting new channels of communication, seem to have led to more isolation. We now spend more time on a screen than we do sleeping. We are more connected than ever before, and yet we're suffering with the highest levels of loneliness in history, coupled with anxiety and depression. Add the challenges of physical separation mandated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have the recipe for a world in which empathy and compassion may ultimately be the gifts of a bygone era. Is there a way that we may turn this around? How may empathy be restored in our homes, businesses, government, nation, and world? How may the younger generations who will be assuming future leadership reconnect and embrace empathy and compassion? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Mimi Nicklin, says that by softening the edge, we may restore empathy as a trait of understanding and compassion. Mimi Nicklin is the author and the host of Empathy for Breakfast Show, as well as the Secrets of the Gap podcast. She's an experienced marketer and communication specialist, a well-known empathetic leader, and the creative officer and regional managing director for a global advertising agency. For more than 15 years, she's been working across the globe with her clients to drive standout creative interventions and lead to a business culture change. Having lived and worked in London, Hong Kong, Singapore, Cape Town, Johannesburg, and Dubai, Mimi's approach changes organizations from the inside out, focusing on cultural, behavioral, and mindset change. She's a natural coach, writer, and creative mind, and has held roles as diverse as strategic director, vice president, and creative officer in some of the world's leading advertising agencies. Her passion for balancing humanism with capitalism drives her commitment to leading the practice of regenerative and empathetic leadership, as well as her principles of people, into organizations and communities worldwide. Her website is miminicklin.com, and she joins me this week to discuss her just-published book, Softening the Edge: How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And thank you for joining us. Mimi, when we welcome a guest for the first time, we ask them to share their paths and how it led to the work they do. Please share your path with our listeners.
Oh, I would love to. My path, I've spent many years working in advertising industry and in marketing businesses and organizations. And in 2018, I was in this current role that I'm in right now, and I was sitting with a business coach, a really fantastic and insightful woman, and we were talking about some business challenges I was facing, and I was using the word instinct. And I said to her, because my instinct tells me X, Y, and Z. And she said, Mimi, can I stop you there? I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered whether what you're calling instinct is actually empathy? And, Victor, I hadn't considered that. And what that did was spark me to start a lot of research and what has now been a 2.5-year journey to really uncovering what the empathy deficit or the empathy gap is that the world is grappling with, and how we can understand empathy more deeply from a leadership, a community, and a society point of view. And I realized that much of what I've been doing for my entire career was very deeply tied with empathetic influence and leadership, but I just hadn't been giving it a name. So my vision and my journey now is to give a name to what those gaps are and the impact in society, and how powerful empathy really can be in making really positive change.
When you recognized your empathetic abilities, did that tie back to your childhood or earlier years? Did you have a sense that you actually have been doing this your entire life?
Yes, I absolutely did. And as that little story sort of tells, I had always thought it was instinct. And of course, instinct is a part of empathy. For many of us, being empathetic is instinctive, but for many it's not. So that's not a prerequisite. But absolutely, to answer your question, yes, I had been using this naturally with my teams and in my advertising agencies all around the world. But I had never realized or put a real sort of functional skill to what that was. So yes, I think it's something that for me I was definitely born with, and I write quite a lot in my book about my father, who also seemed to very inherently carry that skill. So whilst I think I was probably born to be this way, one of the things I talk a lot about is that empathy is a skill that we can learn and hone. So it doesn't have to be something that you've had throughout your whole life in order to start activating that and building on that.
A lot of our listeners consider themselves empaths or empathic. Is there a difference between this and being empathetic?
No, not really. I mean, really, they're all sort of versions of the same thing. When we talk about empathy, we're talking about understanding others. We're talking about perspective taking. We're talking about understanding the context or realities of those around us. So empaths are people that often see themselves as being very, very aware, finding that taking on of perspectives of others very natural to them. But fundamentally, we're talking about the same skill set in the brain across those terms. This is something that we're born with. All human beings are born with this ability. It's deeply embedded into the prefrontal cortex in our brains, and it is the ability to understand the realities of others, to connect with them, to understand how they're feeling or seeing things. So there are a variety of terms, but fundamentally it's the same skill set that we're activating within the brain.
What is the difference, or is there a difference, between empathy and sympathy?
It's such a great question, and I'm smiling because I get asked it a lot. And yes, there is definitely a difference. I like to say that whilst empathy pulls us together, it reduces distance between people. When you empathize with someone, you understand, you lean into their world, you see things more like they are seeing things. So you're becoming closer with that person. Sympathy, on the other hand, creates distance. It makes you move away from that person, because when you have sympathy, it's a type of pity or compassion. You may feel sorry for them, you may feel pity for them, and these are not bad emotions, these are good emotions, but they create distance because you don't actually understand that person. So you may hear some sad news that someone has had, you may send them a card, for example, in sympathy, and then it's done. You haven't actually got any closer to understanding them or engaging with them or seeing things. You have expressed sympathy. You have made it be known that you do feel pity for that environment, for that context, but you haven't made those strides to becoming closer in understanding as two human beings. So yes, they are two very different emotions, neither being better than the other, but just simply different ways that we express ourselves.
And in expressing sympathy, we really don't have an opportunity to feel those feelings within ourselves and in turn grow our own empathy and compassion, do we?
Yeah, absolutely. You can. I mean, something that starts with sympathy can become, you can activate empathy to change that scenario, to become closer to those people. But that is a choice. I always talk about empathy being a choice because, as I said earlier, we are all born with empathy. It is built into our neuroscience of who we are. But choosing to empathize, choosing to activate those skills is something that you are fully sort of able and in control of. So you're absolutely right. Those are different. But sympathy can turn to empathy should you activate that skill set to now become closer to the understanding of that reality.
I understand that there are three types of empathy: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. What are the upside and downside of each?
That's a really, really interesting question. I tend to only talk about the first two for many of the reasons that we just said. Compassionate empathy, to start with the last one that you mentioned, often also known as empathic concern, is very, very similar to sympathy. And given my sort of role and my passion is to communicate to leaders and to people in business and community or organizations in the community, I find that it's much more helpful to focus on cognitive and emotional empathy. If we start with the cognitive empathy is really about perspective taking. It can be incredibly helpful in the business world if you're looking at how to motivate, understand, negotiate, and comprehend what's going on in a group or in individuals around you. I think there's very little drawbacks of cognitive empathy. But the benefits are, especially from a leadership point of view, that you can truly understand your audience. And once you can understand people, you're creating trust. And trust is probably one of our most important currencies in the business world. You create loyalty. You can aid decision making. You're actually creating a data set because you're able to take the perspective of others, whether that's clients or customers or your own team. So there are many benefits to how we can use that cognitive thinking empathy, that perspective taking, to create data for decision making. Emotional empathy is the much more emotional form of empathy. It's actually based on the mirror neurons in our brains. It's the natural form of empathy that these neurons in our brains activate, whereby we feel what other people feel. So cognitive empathy is about understanding what they feel. Emotional empathy is about feeling what they feel. So as you can imagine, many benefits of emotional empathy, because you're able to connect, you're able to understand, you're able to relate. The key thing about empathy is you're not looking to judge. You're looking to have that understanding of those other people. In terms of drawbacks of emotional empathy, I think there are very few, because there aren't many environments in the world today where a little more understanding wouldn't go a very long way. However, if you're in an environment or a role, perhaps you're a doctor or a nurse or a caregiver, that emotional empathy can be overwhelming if you have it activated sort of all day, every day with everybody around you. So there is a point where your own self-empathy has to kick in order for you to be able to perhaps take on the emotions of others, understand the emotions without actually sort of feeling the weight or living through those emotions. So emotional empathy is something that you do have to be slightly more aware of in terms of taking that understanding. You don't need to actually carry the emotions of others.
So would you suggest a balance or a blend of cognitive and emotional?
Absolutely, I would. And from a corporate or organizational point of view, you'll find that many people believe that it's cognitive empathy that has more of a role because it's the more rational, data-led sort of type of empathy. But I would say that the balance of the two is absolutely critical, and particularly as we recover from COVID-19, that need for emotional empathy in the workplace, that need for emotional empathy from your leaders, whether that's in a religious institution, a community institution, or a workplace, organizational business, that balance of having emotional understanding is what's going to make all the difference to the human beings that are trying to thrive within that group.
Having been in industry, and in particular industrial sales for 42 years, I've blended cognitive and emotional, and I've also taught that to the new upcoming salespeople and customer service staff, and I find it very, very effective.
Absolutely. And I talk a lot to sales teams because there is a huge value in how we can use empathy, as I'm sure you have in all those years of your career, to talk to people, to work with people, to convert sales. Whilst empathy is a very natural human and humanity-led skill that we have, it can also make you money, right? It can also be a tool that sales teams can use to better understand their target market, to better understand their customers, and therefore to serve them better.
And there's different types of sales. There's also sales to the public in a national sense, and we'll talk more about that later. Does empathy have a gender bias? Are women more empathic than men?
I don't believe so, Victor, but this is a topic that I talk quite widely about. There isn't huge depths of research yet on this from a neurological point of view, although there are studies. And if your listeners have a look on the internet, they'll find some basics of this research going on out there. What we know is that there's very little proof that from a neurological point of view, the male and the female brain empathize to different levels. What we also know is there does seem to be some slight differences from a DNA point of view, which may point to different ways of activating empathy. Again, not necessarily more or less empathy, but the way we activate it. And of course, hormonally, men and women are quite different. And there is also discussion as to how that may or may not impact our ability to empathize. But what I have found in my studying is that what is far more likely, based on today's evidence, is that women do tend to activate empathy more often and more naturally due to contextual realities, due to the fact that for many generations, women have been listening, hearing, caring roles in the community. So there is a belief, and certainly a belief that I hold, that kind of generational learning over hundreds of years, really, that has seen women as the caregivers in most family and community units does certainly impact their use and their speed of use of empathy. But what I always say, and I think it's so important in terms of the message, is that men and women can equally empathize. And again, going to my point earlier, this is about choice. And what's fantastic about empathy is that simply making the choice to be more empathetic will make you more empathetic, due to the neurobiology of our brains, due to the neuroplasticity of our brains, which is how the brain adapts to scenarios. Once you make the decision, male or female, you will activate that part of your brain and that will become more of your reality. So either sex, we are both equally able to use this skill.
And to my brothers who are out there listening to this show this evening, open your hearts and bring in the empathy and learn how to communicate with that empathy, because it's so critical in our world today. So thank you for sharing that. Is there, well, you talked about the neuroplasticity and the neurology. What is the science? What does science tell us about empathy?
Well, what we know is that from an evolutionary point of view, we, as I sort of insinuated earlier, we did evolve to use this skill. This is something that is, as I said, in the prefrontal cortex of our brains. It has been there from an evolutionary point of view to allow us to thrive in groups and indeed as individuals, because being able to empathize with others helps us be the pro-social beings that we are, because fundamentally as humans we do better when we're together. But it also, of course, allows us to understand others so that we can improve our own environments. So the science shows us that it is something, as I said, that we're born with, that's built into the brain, that it's a skill set, that like any skill, you know, whether that's cooking or perhaps playing golf, the more you practice it, the better you get, because of that neuroplasticity, which means that the more you tune your brain to follow certain paths, the more natural they will become. The other thing that has been a great sort of uncovering in relatively recent science is the discovery of something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons in your brain that allow you to mimic or mirror others. And that is what that happens, for example, if I talk about yawning. If I talk about a story with yawning in, the chances are that that person will yawn. In fact, probably now that I've said the word yawn a few times in a sentence, most of your listeners are now yawning. That is your mirror neurons. Your mirror neurons are built in your brain for protective purposes. So if you see someone yawning or hear someone talk about yawning, you do it too, because you're trying to fill oxygen into your body like the person around you. So we do know that there's lots of evidence now that shows that this is something, as I said, that is deeply embedded in our makeup of our bodies physiologically.
And I just wonder, have there been studies of those who have shown no empathy? For example, those who have been serial murderers?
Yes, there are studies on that. What we know is that there's a couple of things. From a social point of view, we have seen empathy declining for over 30 years now. And as that decline has been happening, we have seen increases in areas such as violence. So there is research. There is actually research on psychopaths and what their brains' makeups are in terms of empathy and how they engage with people. Interestingly, it doesn't always show low empathy. Sometimes it shows high empathy, but just a very different diagnosis or leverage of those neuropaths in the brain and how they respond to them. But certainly there are types of people on the planet who feature very low on the empathy scale, and that does often result in violent tendencies.
Her name is Mimi Nicklin. She's the author of Softening the Edge, How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World. Mimi, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
Thank you. Yes, they can get my book on Amazon.com. It's there now. They can find me on my website, that's miminicklin.com, or on Instagram or LinkedIn with that same name.
And we'll be back with more of Mimi after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization. Their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
If a natural disaster comes knocking, how prepared is your family? You can't just close the door on earthquakes, floods, or hurricanes and hope they go away. That's why it's important to make a plan now. Ready.gov/plan has the tools and tips you need to prepare your family for an emergency. So if disaster shows up at your doorstep, you'll be ready. Visit ready.gov/plan and make a plan today. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
I'm Kathy Williams, host of Sexy Mom Abundant Life radio show on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. On the show, we explore living abundantly in every area of your life. Ways to let go of limiting patterns and beliefs and to step into the flow of creativity and possibility, knowing you are supported by the universe.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your football buddy, your football buddy, or you, your best man, your worst man, you, your dog walker, your cat jogger. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. That's doihaveprediabetes.org.
Wait, did they just say 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes? That's 33.33333% of adults. That means it could be me, my boss, or my boss's boss, or me, my favorite sister, or my other sister. That's 7 members of my 21-person romantic book club. Wait, the 1 in 3 could be me, my karaoke partner Carol, or my karaoke enemy Jeff. I'm going to take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Mimi Nicklin. We're talking about her book, Softening the Edge, How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World. Mimi, what is the connection between empathy and mental health?
Thank you for asking that question. It's such an important one in today's age, and certainly after the year that has been 2020, and the reality that people are experiencing. There's a couple of ways that empathy and mental health intertwine. Of course, from a workplace point of view, which tends to be something I talk a lot about, we know that empathetically run or empathetically led organizations are likely to have much lower levels of emotional or mental health problems. The reality is, as human beings, our most fundamental need is to be seen and to be heard. That is what drives us as people. That is what drives us to grow and to thrive. And when we are in environments where there isn't any empathy, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, we are seeing 30 years of declining empathy levels, we do see areas such as anxiety, depression, loneliness, and burnout going up. Whilst the data cannot tie it directly, so we cannot directly tie the empathy deficit to these areas, we do see huge correlation. So the data does show, as I said, that as empathy declines, these facets go up. So one can then therefore assume the opposite, which is that when we improve our empathy levels in our environments, our organizations, and our communities, we see more content people. We also know in areas such as loneliness, that when empathy is low, when people feel isolated or alone, there's a whole host of health risks, not just emotional and mental health, but areas that move into immunity issues, health issues, heart issues, even things like diabetes that are seen to go up when loneliness goes up. So there are an array of health issues that we see occurring when empathy levels are low. The other area I would mention is self-empathy. Self-empathy being the ability to understand ourselves better, to spend time truly understanding how you are feeling in an environment, what's bothering you or exciting you, how you're experiencing or responding to things. And those that use self-empathy more and more effectively, again, we see lower anxiety, lower depression, and we see higher movements towards areas such as innovation and risk-taking. So certainly, as I said, when you see empathy at low levels, both in the community or with yourself, we do see those mental health issues on the higher side.
Have you seen studies connecting suicide to this?
Look, there are lots of insinuations in this area, so I don't think I found any data that directly links that, but I do make that link often in my book and in sort of when I'm talking. What we know is that suicide levels are now at the highest that they have been for 50 years. And when I talk about the reasons, one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about talking about this topic is that according to the World Health Organization data, the second biggest killer of our youth, so that's 16 to 24-year-olds, is suicide. So when our youth is choosing to not live on this planet with us rather than stay and thrive, we know we have a problem. And as I said, after 30 years of declining empathy levels, there are a lot of very, very overt ties behind this empathyless society that we see and how people are experiencing life, and indeed areas such as suicide.
Mm. You mentioned self-empathy. I remember a line from an old Moody Blues song from 1970 written by Justin Hayward called Question. And there's a line that says, when you stop and think about it, you won't believe it's true, that all the love you've been giving has all been meant for you. I know many who extended empathy and compassion to others and really, really neglect themselves. How may we empower ourselves with self-empathy?
I don't think I know that song, but I just love that line you said. Really, really beautiful. How we can use self-empathy, look, a huge amount of that comes down to two things, awareness and time. Awareness being that you do have to be self-aware. And you are right that for many of us, empathizing with others is far easier than empathizing with ourselves. We're on a treadmill, life is too fast, we worry about everybody else other than ourselves. Awareness is a really important part of that. I do believe that in COVID-19, one of the opportunities we have seen is perhaps slightly more time to be aware of these things because we've been at home more. Life has been slightly less treadmill-like as we stay in our homes. The awareness is a really important part, taking that moment to recognize how you feel. And of course, the second part is time. I always say that there are two great enemies of empathy, all forms of empathy, time and stress. Time being the first one, in that if you want to improve your self-empathy levels, you need to give yourself the time to do that. If you are running at 100 miles an hour, it is very easy to ignore how you feel and how you're responding to things. Some areas such as yoga, meditation, gardening, perhaps, spending time outside, areas of life where you can slow down enough just to take perspective of how you are feeling yourself are incredibly important.
What about the question of self-worth?
That is probably a question for someone more specialist than me in terms of sort of psychology and self-identity. But from my own point of view, I think self-worth does come from having that self-empathy. Certainly for me in my journey to becoming an author and to becoming a thought leader in this space, this passionate journey for me, as I've been able to improve my self-empathy and really understand what it is that drives me, how I feel about it, how I find my energy in life and those things that fuel me and make me happy, without a doubt, my self-worth has gone up. And I do believe that when we find the things that we're passionate about, we become more whole. And if you define self-worth as partly in that vein, becoming more whole, becoming more true to who you are and how that makes you feel, then absolutely, in my experience, as self-empathy goes up, self-worth will also follow.
Let's discuss some of the ways that empathy impacts our relationships. How may we be more empathetic with our spouses or partners?
Like the key sort of backbone to all empathy, whoever that relationship is with, is listening. And this is something that we can activate almost immediately. So for anyone listening to this today, simply the ability to listen more to your partner, to your husband, your wife, the person that you're in a relationship with, will make a huge amount of difference. And I don't know about you, but often you're in a meeting or a family dinner or event, and someone will ask you, "Oh, Mimi, what do you think about that?" And you go, "Oh gosh, what did they say? I wasn't really listening." You were in the room, physically you could hear them, but actually you were thinking about what to cook for dinner. Do you need to buy new dog food? When have you got to go back to school and pick up the kids? You weren't really listening. You weren't active listening or empathic listening. You weren't actually really paying attention to what those people were saying. So a couple of tips on that could be useful from a relationship point of view. Eye contact. Eye contact is a hugely important part of empathic listening or active listening. Making sure that you're really looking at people, that your body language is open, that your shoulders are facing them, that you're leaning in. Really important part of showing that you're listening, showing that you've understood. Something else that your listeners can try doing is repeating back to people the last perhaps 3 or 5 words of the thing that they last said. What it does is it allows the person you're listening to confirm if you heard them correctly, and to make them feel that you really were hearing them, that you were tracking with them, that you understood. So these skills are all things you can use in the home, in the kitchen, in the garden, listening to people, making eye contact, using your body to show that you're interested, and then mirroring these last few words of sentences and showing people that you really heard what they said and that you're looking to ensure you got it right are really motivating factors in any relationship.
Sacred listening is one of the things that I employ in my spiritual counseling sessions, and I also teach it to others. And there's an ancient Greek philosopher who once said, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice, speak once." And I think that's something we all can benefit from today.
Absolutely.
How may we teach empathy to our children?
Oh, that's probably my favorite question, because I have a 3-year-old and I just absolutely love talking to parents about this. I think it's something that, again, comes down to listening. It's very tempting for us as parents to constantly tell children what we think and how we think things should be and how we see things. And of course, a huge part of our role as parents is to teach. But listening to them and making sure, again, that they know that they're heard, that they're seen, is an incredibly important part of parenting. There's a reason that parenting books so often tell you to kneel down when talking to children, or certainly if you're trying to discipline them. Because when you're at their level, you're looking them in the eye, you're facing them, all the same principles apply. That information is far more likely to be received, and the response that you get from your children will activate their subconscious. So you will find that you get much deeper, more resonant responses and insights from them. The thing about our children is that they copy everything we do. So if we role model empathy with them, if we listen to them, if we really hear them, if we use inquiry to better understand what they're trying to tell us, and of course patience, because certainly with toddlers, I speak from experience, you need patience to really hear them, because sometimes it takes them a while to be able to express themselves. If we role model these behaviors, we can hope, but I believe we will see children that grow up with a far more heightened sense of what empathy is. And if we can teach that behavior in our homes, we can also start to see that happening in schools and in playgrounds, and start to see them modeling that with their friends. It's an incredibly important part of the empathy discussion, how we parent and also how we start to build it more deeply into the schooling system, so that we can start to really build a generation of far more empathetic leaders and people to come.
Absolutely. With physical separation, many of us are meeting over Zoom, Skype, Google Rooms, and the like. Is it possible to show empathy over a video call? And if so, how?
Absolutely it is. Again, a really resonant question right now that lots of people are asking me. Really, if you're on a video screen, all the same things apply. If we were now talking on a video, and actually I'm doing it naturally, even though you and I can't see each other, I'm leaning towards you right now. There are many skills like that you can use on a Zoom or a Skype or a Teams call. Maintain eye contact, really important, probably even more important than if you were in real life, because when people are looking through a screen, they know immediately when you're not looking at them. If you look at a phone screen or you're looking out the window or at the TV, people immediately know that you're not focusing. So eye contact on the camera, on the person's face, really important. Lean into that screen, roll your shoulders towards them. I mean, not in an uncomfortable sense, but enough to show them that you're engaged, you're hearing them. That role of repeating, I'm really showing people, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? Did I get that right? Could you tell me more? Those types of inquiring questions really help, again, to drive relationship, to drive connectivity over a screen, so that people really feel, that you were hearing them. So absolutely, we can drive empathy. We have to drive empathy on a screen, because the business world has made a change, and one would argue that it's never going back to quite what it was. And as we do more and more of our meetings of minds over screens, being able to create connection, to look at people, to hear them, to understand their context is more important than ever.
How can businesses develop an empathic model, and in doing so, attract and grow their customer base?
It's a really great question. It's a very wide question. It's something we could probably talk about for another hour. I talk a lot about regenerative leadership, which is the term that I gave to this approach to businesses that is regenerative. We have been through many decades of sort of growth at all cost mindset, whereby businesses just continue to grow and to take out more money, more shares, more returns, more profit. Regenerative leadership is about how do you balance both the people and your profits, the humanism and the capitalism. These are decisions that have to be actively made from a cultural point of view, from a leadership point of view. It is a shift in thinking. It is a shift to, as I mentioned at the very beginning today, to listening to people, to actually actively taking the perspectives of those around you, to use that as part of your data in the business as a decision-making set. So there are a whole row of principles within that in terms of how we build those cultures. Fundamentally, culture is built at the top. So the first step, as I said earlier, is to make the decision that as a leader, you want to build an empathetic organization, that you believe that emotional intelligence in your business is going to reap rewards. what we know from the data is that it does, not just from a human point of view where we see higher loyalty, higher trust, lower absenteeism, lower staff turnover, but we also have data that shows higher performance, often 3 or 4 times higher performance, output, and efficiency. So these are decisions that leaders can really study whilst making those changes as to the benefit to both the people and, of course, the bottom line of that business as well.
Her name is Mimi Nicklin. She's the author of Softening the Edge, How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World. We'll be back with more of Mimi after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Vox Novus expands the horizons of Destination Unlimited, providing a platform for popular culture, lifestyles, interfaith spirituality, personal empowerment, environmental concerns, inspiration, and so much more. Each week I will present authors and experts who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate this rapidly changing world. Join me, Victor the Voice Fuhrman, each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and listen to the Vox Novus, the new voice.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Next Thursday, you will be caught in an extreme flash flood.
Disasters don't plan ahead, but you can. Talk to your loved ones about making an emergency plan. Get started today at ready.gov/plan. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Sweet strawberry icing. You're in Goodwill, and just past that vintage denim jacket you spot miniature donut earrings. You lean in. That's the scent of shopping success. Because at Goodwill, every item you buy funds local job training and more. So bring home those donut earrings and bring home so much good to your community. Goodwill. Bring good home. Brought to you by Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Back back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this week is Mimi Nicklin. We're talking about her book, Softening the Edge, How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World. Mimi, as businesses begin to reopen after COVID, what suggestions would you have to increase empathy in the workplace?
I think an awareness of wanting to do that is probably my first answer. I think what we have to realize is that this year has deeply shifted reality for everybody. And however you've been impacted by that, everybody has been impacted and everybody's feeling slightly differently. So my first, I guess, tip to businesses is to elevate the awareness of the need to have a more emotionally intelligent and more empathetic organization, because people need it. The ways that I would do that, I think I mentioned earlier that culture is incredibly important and that culture starts at the top. So you need to have leaders at the very top of organizations that believe in both the value and the values that come with that shift to an organization that is interested in listening, that is interested in hearing, that is interested in understanding how staff want to come back, how they feel safe, what home environment they might be dealing with, and how that impacts organizational change going forwards. So those would be the two first things I would say. One, which is having an awareness of the need for this, and two, for ensuring that they're building culture from the very top, that it becomes part of the KPIs of the organization. Because what I always say is that what you measure manifests. And if that is not built from the top into your systems, into your cultures, it will never truly be rolled out across that organization.
And for those not familiar with the term, KPI is key performance indicators, right?
Yes, key performance indicators. So just the way that we measure the successes, what are the actual objectives and sort of criteria that we're aiming to achieve, and how do we build empathy, empathetic understanding, listening skills, connectivity into those key performance criteria that we're building our business around.
Now, here's the big question. Is it possible for employees to teach empathy to the leader who lacks it?
Look, I think that's a very difficult question. I get asked a version of it quite often. I think what we can do as any individual is role model, as I said earlier with parenting, is role model that behavior. It is very difficult for teams to change their leadership, but as human beings, it's quite easy for us to influence those around us if we are consistent and authentic about those behaviors. And as I said, empathy is contagious. So if you can start with those around you, if you can propagate that into the teams around you, and start to show the benefits of that to your leadership team, then perhaps you can start making a change system-wide. But as I said, I think it does take quite a brave set of people to try and change up the ladder. But the millennials and certainly the Gen Zs coming up behind them are going to demand this. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, because actually we don't have a choice. We have to create more empathetic organizations. And those leaders that don't embrace this will find themselves missing out, both to the top talent, to the progress, and to the customers. So any team that's out there, I would suggest that you make a case and that you start to build in some of these data points. There's lots of them in my book that show leadership, why this is important now, and why it's important for the future.
Unfortunately, here in the United States, some government leadership seems to have an empathy gap. Short of the change that comes through the electoral process, how may we deal with this?
Yes, I've heard quite a lot of stories coming out of the US about this. I know Michelle Obama was heard speaking about an empathy gap in politics recently, just a few weeks ago. Again, very difficult for groups of people to impact their leadership. And of course, when you're talking about government or politics, you're talking about leadership at the highest level. I would say that the answer to that is to start in the microsystems around us, to start in our homes, to start in our communities, to start in the teams of people around us in our working environments. I write a lot about the fact that as the world gets tougher, as the world gets sharper edged, whether that's politics, it's disease, it's war, whatever it is that we're fighting, as the environment gets tougher and sharper edged, the need for us as individuals to propagate empathy between each other, to build trust and loyalty, to build understanding, to try and decrease loneliness and areas such as depression and anxiety that come from some of these wider reaching facets of society becomes even more important. So I think sometimes we can feel a little bit helpless when we have these large global issues. But for me, the answer is always to focus on those around us that we can influence. And if we can all embed just a little more empathy, a little more often to those around us, we can create the ripples of change from very small beginnings.
And as voters, as we consider, regardless of our party affiliation, voting for the next leadership, we can give them a test to see whether or not they demonstrate empathy. We can ask for that in the debates, in the media, and so on. And I think that is something that is very, very important, especially as we move to the future.
Absolutely. And I know very little about the ins and outs of American politics, but what I know about global politics is that all around the world, this is a discussion that is rising. That people are asking of their governments and their leaders to imbue more empathy into their decision-making and their communication. And certainly Prime Ministers such as Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand is extremely well known for doing just that. She's often written about as being a very empathetic leader and prime minister. So things are changing in some countries around the world. So I would agree with you, Victor, that the need to ask for these things, to encourage a change, is really very important.
You are a millennial, and you point to estimates that show by 2021, 46% of the workforce will be comprised of and led by millennials. You share that most of us do not enjoy our work. Burnout is at an all-time high. Depression is impacting over 33 million people, and the younger generation is leaving the corporate workplace in droves. You say that by failing to proactively nurture empathy in our future leaders, we're failing to protect our future, and we need an intervention now. What shall we do?
I do say all of those things, and when you say them back to me, it makes me feel very, very inspired by what we could do. I think the answer is very similar. What we can do is make a decision to make a change. As I mentioned at the very beginning today, this is a skill you have. You can be more empathetic. You can drive empathy into your workplaces, your relationships, your connections. You can create the ripples of change. Being aware of these things, as I said earlier, the awareness is so, so important. That's what gets me up every morning. And then making the choice to do so, making the choice to hear people better, to allow people to feel seen, to give people a voice and the space to use it. Sometimes this takes patience. Sometimes this takes time. And certainly emotionally led leadership, shall we say, is not always the easiest path. It can be easier just to sort of bulldoze your way into a room and do what you want and what you think. But allowing people to have the space to contribute is always going to improve from a value point of view, because everybody has value in their story to tell.
And as we touched upon before, listening and really hearing what people say is a key to this.
Absolutely. Probably the key, the backbone to all empathy sits in listening.
What would you like readers to take away from Softening the Edge?
I would like them to take away the summation of this discussion, actually, to be honest. I would like them to take away that we have a problem, that we have a societal problem in America for sure, but all around the world, that we have an empathy deficit, a term that actually President Obama coined in 2006 prior to becoming president. We have an empathy deficit. It's been going on for over 30 years. That there are really huge impacts of that in society. We've touched on them today. Mental health issues, burnout issues, even suicide issues. There are huge issues in our society that are being negatively impacted by this lack of empathy. And that if we don't make an intervention, if we don't make a change, we're not protecting ourselves for times to come, and we're not pulling ourselves together. We need to be together. We are pro-social animals. We do better when we're together. And if there's ever been a time in recent history where we have needed to gather around one focus, it would be now. And I believe from a corporate world point of view, we need, as you said, we need an intervention. We cannot continue to accept that people are on antidepressants for turning up to work. It's just not okay. We shouldn't be suffering. We shouldn't be getting ill due to our work. And that for me demands demands a change.
What's next for Mimi Nicklin?
What's next? What's next is I'm actually writing my second book. So my first book comes out on the 15th of September. It's, as I said, available on Amazon already for pre-orders. My next focus is moving into the second book to really start uncovering curiosity and how we can use our curiosity to drive more creativity and inquiry into society and into the corporate world. And of course, going into season 2 of my breakfast show, which, as you mentioned at the beginning, is called Empathy for Breakfast, and is a live show that I do on Tuesday mornings on this side of the world, and available on YouTube, and delving into season 2 and really looking at all kinds of areas that empathy impacts, and really providing data and evidence to many more people to make a change and to create more awareness of the power of empathy.
Sounds like a very nurturing and tasty breakfast.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Her name is Mimi Nicklin. Her book, Softening the Edge, How Humanity's Oldest Leadership Trait is Changing Our World. Mimi, one more time, tell listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
Thank you. You can find me on my website, which is miminicklin.com, or my book, which is on amazon.com now. My breakfast show, as I said, if you look up empathyforbreakfast.com, and also have a podcast called Secrets of the Gap, which is available on all podcast platforms.
Mimi, thank you so much for not only writing this book and putting out your message, but really being a spokesperson for your generation. We need more folks like you to come forward and move us into the future successfully.
I'm absolutely honored. Thank you so much for such a wonderful message and for having me on your show. I'm thrilled to have been here with you and your listeners.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.